I believe we're at the point that we are going to have a presentation by the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Is that presenter here? Okay, great. You've already been sworn in, but please identify yourself again.
Sure. My name is Emily Schultz. I'm with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Okay. So thank you to Chairwoman Rucker and to members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. I work at the National Alliance. It's a nonprofit national organization dedicated to raising student achievement for all students by fostering a strong public charter school sector. We do this work by advising state legislatures how to construct legislation that fits the needs of their state, but also reflects the lessons learned and the best practices from 44 other states that have passed laws enabling public charter schools. On a personal note, while my organization is based in D.C., I live in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. While I know that every state is unique, and being in West Virginia has really emphasized that for me, I see some similarities between my home state and West Virginia, particularly in how our states approach public charter schools. So first of all, just some basics. Public charter schools are public schools that can choose to waive some of the requirements of traditional district schools. Specifically, they have flexibility in budget, curriculum, and staffing. This allows charter school founders the opportunity to design a school that best reflects the needs and desires of the particular community where they are located and move away from the one-size-fits-all requirements of our traditional public schools. In exchange for this flexibility, public charter schools agree to higher levels of accountability. If they do not meet certain outcomes, they're closed. While no one likes to close any public school, this is part of the theory of change of public charter schools. We need more good schools. And if a public charter school is not serving students at acceptable levels, it does not deserve to continue to educate students. In 2017-18, there were more than 7,000 public charter schools serving nearly 3.2 million students, or 6% of the 50 million public school students in the U.S. In 2015, 55% of charter school students were eligible for free or reduced price lunch versus 52% of district school students. In 15-16, 56% of charter schools were in urban areas, 26% in suburban areas, 7% in towns, and 11% in rural areas. Research shows that charter schools do a better job of serving low-income students and students of color than their traditional district peers. In states with strong public charter school laws, which I'll discuss in more detail in a minute, charter schools tend to outperform their traditional district peers. The proposed legislation that you're considering includes several components that we recommend that states include in their law based on the experience of other states. Specifically, we encourage states to allow local school systems as authorizers in order to allow them to use public charter schools as a tool for improvement. We encourage states to include high levels of accountability, specifically what we call an automatic closure provision. This means that it is not optional to close a public charter school if it is not meeting outcomes. The language in this bill includes an exceptionally strong automatic closure provision. Finally, we encourage states to include strong application requirements in their law. This ensures that authorizers have all the information they need to determine whether or not an applicant is prepared to operate a high-quality public charter school. It also requires applicants to demonstrate that the community wants this school and the model reflects the desires of the community it wishes to serve. Overall, public charter schools won't be the solution for every community and every problem that plagues public education, but we believe strongly that public charter schools can be a useful tool in West Virginia's toolkit as you take on the important work of serving all West Virginia students. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to use the prerogative of the chair to ask the first question because I think this might help a little bit with the discussion we were having previously. If there are no applicants to a charter school, the charter school can't start.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so in a situation where we have, folks wanting to start a charter school in a county and the county doesn't want it, is there any way that charter school could start?
I can't think of any feasible way a school could demonstrate desire for a school if there is no desire to go there.
From the community or parents or things
exactly.
like that. Okay, thank you. The senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Emily, for being here. I heard you mention you were from Alabama. I believe they have recently, in the last few years, have brought in charter schools.
Yes, sir.
How is it I'll ask you a couple questions. How's it going, and how does Alabama's language compare to ours?
That's a great question. So Alabama passed its law in 2015. Now 2019, we have 2 charter schools. Our standards are comparably high in terms of it should be hard to start a charter school. It should be hard to keep one open. So 2 schools were approved, 8 were denied because their applications were not up to par. The 2 schools that are open are very different, but they're serving very clear and distinct needs. One is in Mobile. It serves only over-aged, under-credited kids, which these are 15, 16-year-olds with 1 credit and no chance of graduating on any sort of reasonable timeline. And about 60% of those kids had at one point dropped out. So they're coming back into the public school system. They're doing phenomenal things with that population. Wow. The other is in an incredibly rural part of our state called Sumter County. And it's the first fully integrated school in that region. It's 54% black, 46% white. Unfortunately, again, first time that black and white kids have gone to school together in that region. So it's certainly not, again, the answer for every community, but those communities have found a lot of value in this tool.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator from Wood?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This question might be a little bit of what you just said. Maybe you could expound on it. What makes the charter schools different? Why are we going to have a charter school?
Yeah, so when I say that West Virginia reminds me a little bit of Alabama,
I'm sorry, let me just interrupt. Would one school district, one county, have a different reason for starting a charter school than another?
Absolutely. Charter schools are just as diverse as the needs of the community they serve.
So I'm starting a charter school in Sumter County, Alabama. When my friend from the 6th mentioned Alabama, I thought he was going to talk about a football game recently that happened, but he didn't go there.
We don't talk about that.
He was a great coach from a certain state.
I've heard that.
But you were talking about Sumter County and or whatever county. What are some reasons that you started a charter school?
Yeah, so it really depends on the community. The school in Sumter County was really started as a vision by some community leaders, including the mayor and a couple of parents of kids that were in the traditional district school system that said, I don't want my children to continue to have the experience that I did. And so they came together and partnered with a university, and that's a generous term. It's a very small college, the University of West Alabama. And they partnered and said, we'd like to build something great, and we'd like to use what we call place-based education because we want our kids to stay here. We don't want to educate them and have them leave, so we want to teach them to appreciate where they live and their community. There's a number of schools that are themed. So I know I've heard a lot of conversation about STEM schools here. There are a tremendous number of STEM schools, and typically when a school opens in a rural community, it's often a themed school because you've got a school that's serving general education needs, and maybe there's a family or a group of families that want to see something different, that want to see arts integration or want to see STEM, and that this is the tool that they're able to do.
Is this the only school they go to? I mean, they'll get their whole education at this charter school instead, right?
Not necessarily. A charter school, charter schools can serve any number of grade levels. So the one in Sumter County is K-8, pre-K-8. It opened its full span. Most of the times charter schools open 2 or 3 grades at a time and grow 1 grade a year as they're getting their model right.
But their whole school day is spent.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
In just that school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wood. Senator from Wood. The senator from Wyoming is next.
Yes, thank you for being here. As you know, in Southern West Virginia, we have very rural areas. And can you tell us how successful the charter schools are in rural areas, and how does it work in a rural area? How do you set them up, and how do they work?
Right. So, so I think I mentioned that there's just under 20% of charter schools are in what we'd probably consider rural or small towns. And typically that your what we call a catchment area. I heard a reference to an attendance zone. A catchment area is what a charter school, the community they want to serve. While any kid can go, they are kind of targeting a catchment area. Their catchment areas are bigger because there's not that many people. And so their catchment area is larger, and the onus and the responsibility is on them to figure out what the community wants. And rural schools I've been to a number of them, particularly Mississippi, Idaho. They're so unique. There's no one that looks like another, just because these communities are so different. Even if they are rural communities, the needs and desires are very different, and some of the deficiencies that a charter can meet are very different.
Well, how would you go about setting up a school in a rural area? Like, does the local boards of education, did they know the need, or did they find the need and try to set them up in different areas where the need is? I mean, how does that work?
So Colorado is a great example where rural local school boards really saw this as a tool. And again, not in everyone, but some local school boards really saw this as an opportunity to provide something that they hadn't been able to provide before. So able to provide a theme school. And sometimes it happens in partnership with the local school system, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's a community parent-driven effort.
But when it doesn't, do they work with the local schools?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
They work along with them?
Yes.
Who has the authority over them when they do that?
When there's a partnership?
So who is the...
I keep referencing Sumter, it's my home state. So in Sumter County, the charter school has a very close working relationship with the Board of Education. All the teachers attend the school's professional development. The traditional district school teachers attend the charter school's professional development, but the commission is the authorizer of that charter school. So in that case, Sumter County.
And where would this commission be?
Where would the commission? I'm sorry.
Where are they at? Where are they at to where you go to them and you get all this authorization to do all this?
So the membership of the commission is typically appointed from across the state, and there's some language in the law you're considering that requires geographic diversity. So you're trying to get perspectives from across the state, and then they typically Alabama's law requires that the commission go to the region where the application is coming from to hold a public hearing. So they met in Sumter County to hear from the community.
But who sets up this commission? Who sets this up, and who?
Your legislation it's an appointment structure. So I believe that the governor and legislative leadership have appointments, and then the state superintendent has or his or her designee. I don't know the terminology.
So these are all appointed positions by by the governor? Or
well, the governor appoints the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Delegates, and then there's some position seats. So based on the person's position, state superintendent or his or her designee. I believe it's the community college chancellor.
So all these people would be on this commission. They would be the ones that would be making the decisions from the applications that will be coming from the different areas that sees a need for the charter schools.
So your law, that's one of the authorizers that the law you're considering sets up. There's also institutes of higher education for your colleges, and then local school boards local school boards.
But in order to put a charter school in any area, you have to have applications first and show the need, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Raleigh.
2 questions, please. Number one, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of, I think, misinformation
Right.
Okay? So, would you answer the question, will our public schools suffer with the existence of charter schools? Would you just address that for all of us?
Sure. I would, no. First of all, charter schools are public schools. This is a different way to do public education. So I think it augments the public school system. It does not detract or take away from it. There's also the phenomenon of a rising tide lifts all ships, and I referenced a lot of charter schools have developed really robust partnerships with their local school system, and it ends up improving the quality of instruction across the different types of schools.
Okay, so then that leads me to the question of giving us a feel for what? Flexibility, because I'm sensing that charter schools have a greater flexibility with curriculum and budget and staffing. Mm-hmm. And also, do their staff have to meet the same requirements, certification, and all of those things, because a lot of people have a lot of fears in this?
Right. So flexibility in staffing is one of the flexibilities they have. That flexibility is there. I have never, and I've been to a lot of charter schools, I've never seen a charter school, especially K through 5, that did not hire all certified teachers. They have to lay out in their application if that is their staffing plan. The only time I have seen an uncertified teacher teach in a charter school is when, usually in 11th and 12th grade, when you want a physicist to teach physics, or you want a math professor to teach algebra. That's really, in very specific circumstances, that flexibility is really important. So that's in terms of certification of teachers, that's one of the flexibilities that charters have.
Okay, so they are tasked with running the school on 90% funding, basically, compared to the traditional regular public schools.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we have the senior senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You've answered a lot of the questions I had here. I'm receiving emails right now specifically from teachers that are opposing this, but then I'm receiving emails from parents supportive of it. And I want you, and I'm going to go into it just a little bit further, then you can answer it as a collective on that. I'm curious about what's the metrics that's making this happen, because from what I can see, it shouldn't be. It should be, this is just another tool in the tool bucket, and that's what you've explained here earlier. But also, give me the categories of the types of charter schools that could be out there. And when I say categories, I'm not talking about where the county can do it and all that.
Right.
I figured that you could do charter schools for special needs. You could do it for the brightest of the bright, music, artistic, the list goes on. You were naming where it was a rural area and it fit the need there. Is there a way to silo some of those so that I can get a better understanding of what opportunities, because our state's so diverse.
Right.
And so I was just trying to get my mind wrapped around that so you know both sides of my question. But I applaud every other question I had here, you've already answered. I'm rather pleased.
Yeah, this is just a kind of a personal anecdote. I used to be a teacher, and then I moved up into a central office. And when I was a traditional district school teacher and administrator, I didn't like charter schools. And that was before I knew what they were, I'd ever been in one. But the message I got was that they were bad. And so when you are a teacher in a school and you've only had traditional district schools as an option, I certainly can understand why there's a fear. My exposure to charters happened when I was a central office administrator in Washington, D.C., and I was responsible for supporting a very low-performing high school that was a district school. There was a charter school that was less than half a mile away, and it was really interesting because a number of families had one child that went to the charter school and one that went to the district school. And the charter school was seeing tremendous outcomes, and we continued to struggle year after year. So I went to the charter school and I said, will you come implement your model in our school? It was a tremendous, amazing partnership because teachers listen to teachers, and those charter school teachers had a great back and forth with the teachers in that district school building, and we were able to raise the scores and raise the educational experience of the students in that district school. So that is when my mind started to change around charters. And I just learned the opportunities that can come with being open-minded about it. But again, when you can't see, touch, and feel something, I certainly understand the fear. In terms of the different themes, I don't know if I could bucket them for you, but you can. I've just seen some really creative things, and it really depends on the community you're in. There's a school in Arizona that is structured around. It's primarily to serve autistic students, but they try their best to get a 50-50 students on the autism spectrum and then non-autistic students. And the theory is that they can both learn from each other. And it's ended up being incredibly successful. You just kind of have to look at what the needs are of the community to know all the different models. I would love to get you all some examples and literature. If you give me a little bit of time, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I know you've been up for a while. We still got a few more questions.
That's fine. No, please.
The senior senator from the 5th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let me give you, before I ask you a question, give you a little perspective of some of the things. So where I live, right next to Ohio and Kentucky, Ohio implemented charter schools, and there's not been a whole lot of good things that have really come out of that. So when you talk to educators across there, and we get a real negative connotation related to that. Mm-hmm. So that's first different perspective. Now, I will get killed for saying this because my wife is on the board of the STEM school in Ohio. They created STEM schools because the charters were not working the way that they should throughout Ohio.
Okay.
So it's a different kind of whole idea of what it is. Where they have failed, is not having the establishment with the local schools. The fear I have in some of this is what groups come in and establish these types of schools. So, they referenced a bill back a few years ago. It is certainly nothing close to what is in here today. You could come in and a entity that's from a real different left-wing perspective or a right-wing perspective in the past bill could set up anything. Tell me how this bill changes how that can happen.
Okay, so a lot of information there, and I'm not as...
I'll give you some more if you want.
I got a lot to work with. I'm not as familiar with the 15 and 16 bill, so I don't know if I can speak specifically to differences. But I can say that you've got a couple, particularly relative to Ohio, which is a good example to bring up. That's why I kind of emphasize the strength of state charter school laws. Ohio had to go back and tighten theirs up 3 years ago because of that low performance. Their accountability wasn't there. Their authorizer oversight was not there.
So they had a lot of 501c3 or individuals that were wealthy that set up 501c3s that established a charter school. Under our bill, can we still do the same thing?
So 501c3s are required.
Oh, I know they are required, but you can have one individual that is quite wealthy that has a certain thing that they want to do in a school, and they can establish a charter school in West Virginia under this bill. Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't prohibit people of a certain wealth level from serving on a 501c3, no.
Okay. So tell me the integration and authority into the state. So one of the things I've heard from a number of people throughout the states, including Alabama, is that the integration and authority in a state needs to be completely controlled or integrated into the state board. So you feel like this bill does that?
I feel like, yes, I feel like this bill gives the state board the authority it needs to ensure high-quality charter schools.
So you indicated the two schools in Alabama that you were talking about. So those are somewhat of special needs schools.
Certainly the one in Mobile, the one in Sumter County it's a very unique situation, but it looks like more of a traditional educational model.
So both of those, you indicated the one in Mobile, how it was started. What about the other one? Give me how that was started. Was it by the county?
No, the applicant group was a community group.
Okay.
That had a number of parents and actually again, like I said, the mayor, a couple of city council members, some professors from the University of West Alabama that I mentioned. So it was a pretty large, and they spent 2 years on the ground having conversations about the schools before they even put together their application.
Okay, and we actually talked last night, because you wanted to talk to somebody that's a little off.
I enjoyed the conversation immensely.
I was involved through SREB in Louisiana before and after Katrina, and Governor Blanco, who I know and really made some tough choices, and so they established a number of charter schools. But in New Orleans, I think everybody that was knowledgeable or even thought they were knowledgeable on charter schools flocked to New Orleans to do that. I don't know that I see that as much here in West Virginia. Expertise.
Right. Louisiana and New Orleans was a point in time and an incredibly unique circumstances for a number of reasons. But that's why I think West Virginia public charter schools are going to look very different than anywhere else.
So tell me on this, that the way that they did it in New Orleans is every school was gauged in accountability as the public schools.
Yes, they essentially converted every school. I mean, schools were closed for a year after Katrina. When they reopened them, they reopened almost all of them as charter schools. And
there's been successes and failures in that. I mean,
it was a lot. I mean,
but so
unlike any other circumstance.
What my point is they're gauged by the same accountability system of all state schools. Do you agree that that's what needs to be done in West Virginia when you have a charter school?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
We have an accountability system.
Okay.
We just changed
from
what was considered 8F, whatever you want to say there. But there is under ESSA standards, we have to have an accountability standards and guidelines. And, thank God it's away from No Child Left Behind. Like I told you that someone in Utah said it was like they described No Child Left Behind as a vulture looking for prey. This standard, we have an accountability system that has been adopted by the board. So you're going to say that these charter schools will abide by those same accountability standards?
They will have to take the same tests at the end of the year to ensure you can compare apples to apples.
Okay, thank you.
And it's the balanced scorecard? Is that your accountability system?
Oh, you shouldn't have said that.
Okay, sorry. Good talk.
No,
that's what I found online when I was doing my research.
Well, that's you saw the old line. That's not true.
I just want to make sure we were talking about what the accountability.
No, the accountability system is different. It's You have different, but it's
Tiers.
not based upon that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Monongalia.
Madam Chair, Emily, Emily, I'm sorry, I did not catch your last name.
Schultz.
Schultz. Well, Ms. Schultz, thank you for being with us.
Of course.
Let's go back to Sumter County
Okay.
and talk about the, excuse me just a second. And go back to Sumter County and talk about the charter school that develops there. And it's my understanding, I pulled you up here on Wikipedia just real quick, just to understand it a little closer and just get some history. The school just opened in 2018.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yeah, well, yeah.
So we can sit around a table and paint a rosy picture, but the fact is you really don't have a lot of data to back up what we're talking about right now to support, the numbers statistically and moving forward. We're babies. We're infants in this process.
About a little more than a semester in.
Okay. But the question I have for you, and we're looking at this piece of legislation and listening to you speak, and we're talking about the opportunities for local school boards and state school boards to have, and as my good friend from the Eastern Panhandle said, input and not necessarily the opportunity to inject changes. So let me ask you, why did the Sumter County District Board attempt an injunction on the opening of USC?
Because there was so one thing we have not talked about yet is facilities. There was a facility of the previous superintendent who left under some duress because of a scandal, was uncomfortable with the use of a school they had sold to the University of West Alabama 10 years ago. And right before he left, he directed his general counsel to file an injunction.
And did he have the support of the school board?
I don't know the ins and outs of that relationship. I don't know. I would assume he would need to in order to file that.
And I have to assume that he was not successful in his attempt to. Okay. That was my only question. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Schultz, thanks for coming today. Let me just preface any of my questions with, I've got nothing against charter schools. I think they're going to unfairly compete with public schools, and that's my only problem. First off, I want to start out because your numbers, and I'm sure I misunderstood you. It sounded to me like the numbers changed a little bit. I thought when you first stood up, you said that only 7% of the schools, I think you used the term small towns, which I would consider rural. You said the rest of them were urban and suburban, correct?
No, we have 4 categories. So
Okay.
urban, suburban, towns, and rural.
What's the difference between a town and a rural? I mean, town's pretty small in our state.
It's a U.S. Department of Education distinction, and I don't know what the exact, but it's supposed to capture. It's supposed to capture small.
I mean, because our biggest cities would be towns in most other
Not
states. I can assure you that.
Right.
Well, right. And again, and I appreciate you bringing it to our attention because, again, our concern is trying to apply a big city, which 80%, some 80% of them are in big cities, to, small town worlds that we live in. But I did want to ask you, and here's my concerns. I mean, charter schools compete for students. They compete for teachers. They compete for funding. I mean, you agree with me on that, or is there some disagreement there?
No. I mean, I think that it's operating as a public school. There are other public schools around.
Well, but other public schools are restrained by districts where you can go to school. If we competed by public school, we'd have 5,000 students in Bridgeport High School in Harrison County because that's where they'd all want to go. Mm-hmm. But we don't do that. Public schools don't compete with each other in that sense. But a charter school that's going to draw from certainly, from one particular county and maybe other counties without any boundaries, that's clear competition because somebody's going to get to make the decision where they go to the charter school or the public school.
Sure.
And I know it's a public charter school, but the only way that I would ever consider charter schools in West Virginia is if we replace the funding that was lost by the public school system, because I always go back to my county. 15%, we have 5 high schools. If 15% of the students were taken out of each high school to make a charter school, the other high schools would still be operating the same buildings, the same number of classrooms. Sure, they may lose a teacher, but they're going to need the same number of janitors, security, all the same things. but with 15% less of the money, I don't know how we would survive that. We have a system that's already strained financially. I mean, have you seen that function anywhere else or play out anywhere else?
The function?
The function of a school system that is already financially starved, diverting significant resources to public charter schools.
So I think, yes, there is, it's the same impact on a local county system as if a child moved to another county. And I don't know if you have a function in your state formula that replaces that money if a child moves. I'm not as familiar with your state funding formula, but the impact is the same. That district,
I'm not that familiar with the state funding formula, so don't feel bad. Go ahead.
States tend to have very complex funding formulas. But I think the impact is the same on the local school system. They no longer have to serve that student. I also think you've accounted for those fixed costs that districts have. I think you've accounted for that in this legislation by letting 10% of that per pupil.
You think it's only 10%? I mean, out of our, and I don't know the exact numbers, and I don't want to portray that I do know the exact numbers, but we spend around $11,000 per student. I think Alabama spends around $12,000 per student.
Oh.
Yeah, it is. It's that high. I know it's amazing.
Well,
but the biggest part of ours, or a big part of our per student cost is for transportation and teacher retirement. That's going to be there no matter how many students you take out of the public school system. Because we're going to have some kids are still going to be down that hollow. We call them hollows here. We don't have bayous, but they're still going to be down that hollow. Somebody's going to have to drive down there 20 minutes to go pick them up and bring them back. Those costs aren't going to change. 10% is not going to cover. Well, I don't expect you to opine on that, and I'm sorry if I asked you. I did get a chance to look up Sumter a little bit, and Sumter's a small county.
It's very small.
I mean, I think it said it had 13,000 people in it, although we have smaller counties, so I just want you to know that.
1,300 school-age kids in the whole
13,000.
1,300 kids,
oh, yeah.
school-age kids in the whole
Actually, it said they had 2,200 kids at one time. There were 1,600 in public schools, 600 in a private school that existed prior to the charter school, and it closed before the charter school even opened because the charter school took all the kids out of it.
It had been losing kids. It was a segregation academy. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it kind of made that clear.
Right.
Yeah, and then after the charter school opened, which has only been a year, the county's already had to close one public school because so many kids had left that there wasn't enough state funding under their formula to keep it open.
That closure decision was made before the charter school opened.
What I read said that it was because of the charter school, the draw-off of students from that school and the charter school. And I guess, in the senator from Monongalia brought up the lawsuit, and, I mean, what is clear here, even the new superintendent is quoted as saying that the public school's competitor is the charter school. And that's what I'm scared of here. I mean, I don't know, if it's going to happen. I don't know if down in rural Alabama there's different politics than there are here, but, I don't know how public schools are going to see a charter school as anything else other than a competitor, particularly when it's taking funds out of their budgets. And so I guess my question is, in that regard, I mean, other than replacing the lost budget funding, is there any other way to ameliorate reduce the tensions between the public schools and the private schools? Or the charter schools.
Okay. So you have a lever in this law that allows conversion charter schools. And that's where I see a lot of opportunity here and in rural communities where, like you said, schools feel constrained by the district, or they feel constrained by some of the rules. There's an opportunity in this law for a local school board to say, we want to do something different. We want to do something unique. We want to not have those constraints. We would like to convert our school to a charter school. It's a strategy that's used across the country. It allows school boards to own that charter school process as a tool.
So it's really kind of like returning local control to the Board of Education, because they're going to establish one of their existing schools as a charter school. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how many states limit their charter school to just the school board's ability to create the charter school?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I know Virginia does, and it has not gone particularly.
Because Ohio didn't, and we've been inundated over the last 5 years with all the problems in Ohio, the corruption, the embezzlement, all of that. That concerns me too. But it sounds to me like if we limited the creation of charter schools to the boards of education and having them use existing schools, that could allow the innovation, and I think we have innovation zones here that try to do that anyways, but that would allow the innovation that charter schools bring as a benefit without causing this inevitable friction between the public school system and the charter schools. Would you agree?
Would I agree that?
I mean, is that what's happened in Virginia? I mean, they've not had that type of friction because it's part of the public school system that's making the decisions?
Oh, I don't know if they haven't. That law was passed a long time ago, and it's not been really revisited since. I think they have one charter school.
In Virginia?
Yes.
In the entire state of Virginia, one charter school?
Maybe two. It's a very small number.
Wow, well. And again, do you have any other suggestions to kind of reduce this friction? Because if you got a war down in Sumter County, I think Mr. Gardner said that we're at war with the charter school. We don't want that in West Virginia. We got enough wars.
I tend to think that if it's not just the school board that you have to be considering when you're looking at this legislation. You've got to be thinking about families, and you've got to be thinking about if families want choices. And so I understand, I don't envy your position as policymakers and as legislators, because you have to consider a lot of different factors and a lot of different input, but I would encourage you to not just hear the perspective of local school boards, but also hear the perspective of families and if they want choices.
No, absolutely. That is our paramount goal, is the education of our kids. I'm just trying to figure out whether we're just failing to give our local school boards the ability to innovate, which sounds very successful. And these are all educators. It's not like most of them were in the public school system. Give them the opportunity to educate rather than trying to create a competing system, for the scarce financial dollars that we've got going out to our public schools the way it is. It just sounds like that might be a more successful system. Would you be able to give us any figures of the states that use the method of allowing the school boards to create charter schools solely, as opposed to Ohio, who let the private charters be created?
So I'm happy to get you some data around if there are other states than Virginia that only allow local school systems to serve as authorizers. At the Alliance, we would not recommend that. We recommend multiple pathways to authorizing, because there are cases where local school boards don't want to respond to the desires of the community.
But, and this is a key for me as somebody who believes in democracy, we can vote them out. The parents, if there's enough parents that want a charter school and that school board won't do it, you vote them out. If they spend too much money, you vote them out. If they don't put enough money in the schools, you vote them out. But charter school boards, we'd never be able to vote out. Correct?
No, you would not vote charter school boards out.
I really appreciate. I know this is your, advocacy, and I know you're doing the best you can with my questions. But I really appreciate you coming down. Most people don't like to answer my questions.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to follow up real quick on a couple of things. You don't vote charter school boards out, but charter school boards are responsible, and they're going to have to go to the county school boards and talk about how they're doing and all of the criteria that was demanded in the contract. They have to be responsive to that, correct?
Yes, they do have to demonstrate working
and
relationship.
And if they're not following through, then what can the county boards do?
I think the county boards have recourse, and even if they're the authorizer, they have all the authority. If the commission or a four-year school is the authorizer, every authorizer should have some sort of complaint process by which a local school board could complain about the relationship they have with the charter school.
And the contracts are all limited, right? After a certain amount of time, that contract needs to be renewed? Oh,
absolutely. Every charters operate on 5-year contracts, and that's at the end of that 5th year if they have not met outcomes.
Okay. And one more question for myself.
Yeah.
So if a county were to want a charter school, if there was that opportunity for a charter school in West Virginia, there is some extra funds available to be able to draw down and help us to start that school?
Yes.
So they wouldn't be completely just talking about the money from the state school funding?
No, there's the federal charter school program is now at $400 million. Only states that have laws that authorize, that enable public charter schools have access to that funding.
Okay, $400 million?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay, Senator from Harrison for one quick question.
I just really liked our earlier discussion, and that just brought up another question. Does Virginia's charter schools qualify for those funds?
They can't apply. I don't think they have applied.
But just having the charter school system that Virginia has, where the school board makes the decision, they would still qualify for those funds.
As far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. The Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Ms. Schultz. I just looked up quickly. It looks like Virginia, according to their Department of Education, has 9 charter schools.
Okay.
Does
I'm
that
sorry.
sound
Yeah.
appropriate? Okay. I just have a few questions. You know, I'm trying to understand. I'm a product of public schools here in West Virginia. I served as a board member here in West Virginia in the public school system, so this is new to me.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, since you've had particular involvement in 2 charter schools in Alabama, and there are certainly some parallels between Alabama and West Virginia. I'm particular about a few, I'm interested in a few particular aspects of school life. For example, food service. You know, food service is mentioned here in the bill, but I don't understand, based on how it's mentioned, how it works. Can you tell me, A, I guess, how it's worked in those 2 projects in those 2 schools in Alabama, and B, if that is set up similar to how it is in this bill?
Sure. So the answer to your second part of your question is yes, the language in Alabama's law and in our model law closely matches what you're considering. Food service, and I don't know the intricacies. I mention Alabama a lot because that's where I live, but I work with a number of states on their policies. Typically, charter schools will contract out food service, usually with a vendor, and it can be, there's all kinds of different vendors out there that can provide food service. Sometimes, in the case of the Sumter County School, they actually contracted with the school system to provide food service to the school. And there's pros and cons to that, but it ended up working for this group.
So in some, just so I understand, so in some circumstances, you have a school that would try and employ in a different, in a different way, a cook, for example. Whereas in some schools, you have a provider that's contracted out, so the cook who had a job at the public school previously wouldn't be there at the public charter school. Is that correct?
I'm not sure charter schools do have to adhere to health and safety requirements. And so they would have to meet all the same food service codes that.
Right, but who's providing that? You know, before you had a cook there at the school level.
At the district school?
Yes.
Okay.
Employed by the school system, by the
Right.
Board of Education. And you're saying in this system that may happen, or you may contract those services out to someone.
Right.
Okay, thank you. What about transportation? Same question.
Transportation is, they receive, charter schools typically receive no transportation dollars, and often they have to find the money to transport students in their per pupil allocation. It's a strain on charter schools, particularly in rural communities.
Yeah, how would you do that? I mean, how have they done that in Alabama? I mean, here, for example, I live in Greenbrier County.
Okay.
Our school system, if you add the combined mileage that the buses run every day, it's from the East Coast to San Francisco back to Middle America in a single day. Mm. So, you know, how has that worked in Alabama, for example? So in
Alabama is probably in Mobile. In Mobile is probably not comparable, but they actually buy bus tokens from the city buses and allow their students to use those tokens. In Sumter County, they run one bus for their special education students, but they do not have buses. Families usually carpool or find other ways to get their kids to the school.
Okay, so if you're in an urban setting, some have used the bus system.
Right.
In a rural setting, there isn't transportation.
Well, and I would say that the Sumter County example is an outlier. Colorado is a state that has large rural swaths, and they they typically contract with the school system to let the charter school students ride on the same bus routes that the districts run. So they pay the district to allow their students to ride the district buses.
So a public school student, I rode the bus to school. So
Me too.
let's say I ride the bus to school when I'm a public school student. The next year, my school becomes a public charter. I could still be riding the same bus.
Sure.
But that would be contracted out at that point. The public charter school would be contracting my spot there out.
Yes.
Okay. It's a lot to wrap my brain around.
Yeah, I understand. Transportation is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so one final question along these lines. There's talk in here of an education management organization. That particular term is used several times throughout the bill in the charter school portion.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that term. I assume that is not just a general term, but it is a specific term. Is that correct? Education management organization?
Education service provider is typically the terminology that's used.
I'm looking at education service provider under definitions means an education management organization.
Yeah, so
that's... What is that?
Sometimes when a charter school, a group of parents come together and or group of parents and teachers come together and they decide they want to start a school, they form a 501c3, they start developing the model for that school. They have seen another model in another state or in the same state that they want to implement in the school they're designing. And so they will contract with the education service provider to implement their model, to implement the education service provider's model in their school.
So an education service provider is a for-profit business?
No, not necessarily. About 14% of education service providers nationally are for-profit. But the rest are a nonprofit.
Okay. Since I was not familiar with that term, I looked it up, and what I found was otherwise. But you certainly work in this area, so if you tell me that, I don't have reason to believe otherwise.
You looked up education service provider, and it said
education management organization.
EMO. Mm-hmm. So that terminology is sometimes used in states to refer to for-profits, and CMO, Charter Management Organization, is sometimes used to refer to nonprofits.
Right, that's what I found, and this specific language is Education Management Organization, which is typically for-profit.
It's state-by-state terminology. It's state-by-state terminology. I refer to EMOs as all of them, nonprofit and for-profit. Colorado refers to CMOs and EMOs. They differentiate. It's education. We like to create acronyms. So.
Yes, we do. Finally, your presentation that you gave earlier was very interesting. It was a lot of new information to me. If you have extra copies, I don't know if other folks would be interested. I'd be interested.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. The senior senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Schultz, thanks for being here. Just some questions. Particularly with rural schools. I think you mentioned, was it 11% in the country are chartered, 11% are chartered rural schools?
Yes.
Okay, 11. And of course, that's significantly lower than the urban and suburban and some of the other areas. Now, in Alabama, at the University of West Alabama, they were the ones that actually initiated the public charter school. Is that right, in Sumter County?
I know that there was a leader from the University of West Alabama who was part of that founding group. Yes.
Right. And part of the lawsuit, as you mentioned earlier with the Senator from Harrison, was that evidently the school system sold the school or sold the old school to the University of West Alabama with the understanding there would never be a school there, and then they then used that facility to do this charter school, and that was kind of the battle that went back and forth over that. So that University of Alabama was involved. Now I know it says from my research just here now that they are a public higher education institution.
UWA, not this UWA and
University of West Alabama.
Very different schools. Yeah, University of West Alabama. Yes. It's a public institution.
Yeah, and so they were involved with the chartering, right? And the facility that they're using is their facility that they're using as the school.
They're leasing it to the charter school, yes.
Okay, so the
For, I think, $1.
So in Alabama, West Virginia, with the legislation we're looking at 4 authorizers. One is a county board, another is a combination of county boards. Then you have the public-private higher education institutions, and then a commission. Where did they go to get their authorization in Alabama? Did the University of West Alabama, since they were a public higher education institution, were they the authorizer themselves?
No, in Alabama, four-year schools are not authorizers. It's just the commission and local school boards. So they went to the commission.
Okay, so they went, okay. Now, as far as in this area, Forbes magazine has done some aspects. They did an article about rural schools, and some of the factors that rural schools have that maybe some of the urbans may not experience. One is tight budgets. Maybe, of course, urban schools may do, but also limited markets. I think it was mentioned here in the sense of in more urban settings, there are more students, theoretically, more students, and also the transportation issue may not be of a major concern, but more in the rural areas, it's limited markets and transportation. Since it's open enrollment, particularly the way it's listed here, that means students could come from anywhere as long as they could get there, right?
Right.
So not only would it impact Sumter County, but say from other counties that they would draw students from to come to that school, that money would follow out of those counties as well into the school. The 90% would come from the surrounding areas.
Yes.
Because they're not limited by geography alone.
Right.
As you mentioned, that our schools the traditional public schools are constrained by districts, as this is one of the things. So with the 5-year contract, particularly in our legislation, but maybe it's modeled after Alabama, after 5 years, they got to renew the contract.
Right.
Who do they go before? Is it the commission?
Whoever their authorizer is.
Okay. And so, but is there any, I guess there's input, but there's no appeal in the sense of if the commission says we're going to authorize another 5 years, that's it, right?
If in the legislation you're considering, or in Alabama?
Yeah.
The legislation you're considering, the commission serves as an appeal body for the other authorizers, but if the commission is the authorizer, yes, that's the last.
So what'd you say, the commission is the appeal body?
Yes.
Of the other authorizers?
Yes.
So, okay, so let me understand this. So say that a county board authorizes a school, a charter school, and the 5-year contract is finished, and say the county says, no, we don't want to authorize it, then do they have the right to appeal to the commission then?
They do. The commission would likely come to the same conclusion. All the authorizers are required to follow those standards, and it is really that automatic closure provision that I mentioned, where it is not permissive to close a school if they do not meet the standards in their contract. It is required. It is a shall statement. There's no feasible way that the commission could come to a different conclusion if they did not meet their standards. If they tried to close them and the school was high performing, I would think we would want an appeal function.
And who do they appeal to?
The commission.
Okay, so all authorizers are equal, but some are a little more equal than others, right? So the commission is the ultimate supreme authorizer, because all the other authorizers, if they would say no, it still could be appealed to the commission.
Yes.
The way we got it written here.
Yes.
And this commission is other than maybe the elected officials from the Senate and House, are unelected, primarily.
The members of the commission?
Yeah.
I don't know how the commissioners of I don't know how the positional
Yeah,
authority.
well, we have the superintendent, he's
And-
appointed, she's appointed, the chancellors, then you have 3 from each of the chambers. Now, they're of course elected by their
Right.
particular people. It may not be the same geographical area. And then you have 2 appointed by the governor. So overall, it's an unelected body.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I want to get to transportation and go to the student, right?
Okay.
So let's, we're talking about the aspects. So so the one thing I want to point out is the commission could open up a charter school in a county, and even if that particular county board of education has some input and maybe go along with them. We know that there's limited market, so students start leaving the public schools, the traditional public schools, going to the charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
That puts a fiscal impact on those schools or on that county board of education.
Okay.
Tight budget already, it adds to it. How about the county that never is the adjacent counties where the students are starting to leave there?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have any input in it, and all of a sudden they're starting to dwindle. Then you get the transportation. So I'm going to talk about, one of the concerns, and, granted, innovation of the charter schools I read, there's various research out there, and there's some innovative things that happen in charter schools. So it allows for student achievement. But the one factor that really is key of research, I'm talking about child development research,
Mm-hmm.
is a caring adult in a child's life. A caring adult, a parent or a guardian. Okay? That is so key in that, and also the key is the family structure of valuing education of that child. So no matter what environment you put them in, if they have those factors, they have a way ahead. And neuroscience is proving this with adverse childhood experience and development. My concern is that we say, okay, well, we're going to help the poorer kids. We're going to do a lottery. So we can't pick and choose the rich ones, and I understand all that. But what about the parent that doesn't sign and says, I'm going to let my child go into the lottery? Because I'm going to tell you on my personal experience. I couldn't get my parents to even sign to let me go on a field trip. When I was going into honors program, they said, John, that's not for you. Wouldn't even sign. I don't think I would have ever had a chance to ever go in a lottery because why? No one would ever put me in. Now, here in West Virginia, we have an opioid epidemic that's eating our lunch, cleaning our clock. I mean, we have the highest number of grandparents and great-grandparents raising their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. We have the highest foster care aspect probably in the nation. We have kids that are going into an environment where their children or guardians may or may not put them in that lottery. So what happens is it's self-selection. These kids that, first of all, their parents are conscious enough to put them in the lottery. Mm-hmm. They care about their kid. That's number one. And two, they have somewhere for all to get their kid to the school because the bus may not be provided, okay, in the rural areas. Mm-hmm. How do we, so those kids that don't fall in those categories that have that, where do they end up? Would they ever get in a charter school?
Would they ever get into a charter school?
Could they under the system? Could a kid that their parents don't put them in the lottery or don't figure out a way to get them to the school, how could they appeal to get into a charter school?
I mean, it's really hard for me to comment on a...
But what do they do in other states?
To get kids whose parents don't want them to go to a charter school to go
or
to a
don't
charter
even,
school?
I mean, maybe they don't want or they're indifferent or they just...
Right. So
how do you get those kids in a charter school?
Anecdotally, what I have seen is that charter school applicants, when they are trying to recruit and show families that they're available, do a lot of pounding the pavement. They get out in communities and they knock on doors and they make themselves known and they make themselves present, particularly if their model is targeting underserved families, underserved students, historically underserved students. And I've seen charter schools go through churches and through all kinds of community centers, health centers, to get the word out. And they have to, I go back to this application, they have to demonstrate that too. If they say in their application, we want to serve underserved communities, a strong authorizer will say, how did you reach those underserved communities? How did you get to the kids whose parents might not be engaged? And there is a pretty rigorous application component that they have to demonstrate that. I don't know what data could answer your question. But
well, I guess what I'm trying to point at here, and this is one of my concerns with us, is we have a lot going on. The school's one aspect of a child's life, but we got a lot going on in that child's life beyond the school.
Sure.
And I know we're sitting there saying we got to, definitely provide the best education, the most innovation. But if that child is hungry or that child is worried about the parent, what home they're going to go to, if they're going to have a home, if they're worried about their parents even allowing them to go on a field trip that they're not going to let them go, those are the children that will remain in the traditional public schools. While the charter schools may demographically take those students that are socioeconomic in different ways, but they still have a caring parent or guardian that made the application in the first place. And if that is the key component, one of the major key components of a student's success, in essence, in the system alone, you're cherry picking. Because only those children that's going to go to charter school are the ones that have a parent or adult that allows them to make the application to go. Those kids that don't, or they don't have any means to get there for transportation, they never have a shot. They stay in our traditional schools. So what happens is you're taking the conscientious parents and bring them over here in the school, and they're working it. And those kids that are remaining, maybe they only have the parents that lost the lottery still there, but then the vast majority, percentage-wise, it grows. And with in my area in Berkeley County, talking also in Jefferson, the sheriffs tell me over and over about when they enter into these homes of overdose, they have the parents that are there literally dead. They Narcan them. They have kids in diapers, kids running around, no guardian there. They call Child Protective Services. They're overwhelmed. It breaks their heart. They don't know even what to do with the kids as their parents are coming up from death. I would say Narcan.
Senior Senator from
I'm wanting to know, my question is on this, is how do we get to these kids so that it's fair? And we don't put the burden on the traditional education system, therefore self-selecting, saying, yeah, charter schools are great because why? We're singling them out because we got parents that care with their kids, as in the traditional schools, they got to take the rest that's left over, especially in rural areas. How do you manage that?
How do you manage this?
How do you manage so that every child has a chance to get a quality education?
I think you give families and educators as many tools as they can to meet the needs of every student. And this is one of those tools. It's not going to be the tool for every problem or every circumstance, but I do believe it's an important tool.
So how does in the rural areas, how do they get transportation? So a kid that wants to apply, they go and they get it, but they're out in a rural area. Do they send a bus out there? Do they send a taxi out there? How are they doing it in the rural areas of transportation? Being able to make sure these kids get there.
As I shared with, I believe, Senator Baldwin about, there's a number, they have to lay out their transportation plan in their application. And charter school can get very creative in how they provide transportation. They can contract with the school system to allow charter school students to ride that traditional district school's bus route. They can contract, though it's very expensive, you can contract with a vendor that can run a bus. You can create pickup points that are much further away than your traditional district route, but it does provide a transportation option.
Is it required?
Is what required?
Is it required that a student that's accepted into the charter school, that somehow that school will figure out a transportation to get that child to the school?
Not necessarily, but
in public school, I think it is required.
Okay.
Is it not required? I guess what I want to know is in public school, it's required that they do provide transportation for that student to come to the school. So I'm asking you, are you saying no, it's not required for the charter school to provide that? So they could say, we accept you, but you're going to have to figure out how to get here.
And if they are serving a predominantly underserved population, their authorizer would say, how are you sure that your school is accessible if you are not providing transportation?
Right.
And they would have to have a good answer.
That this authorizer could be a private institution of higher education.
Yes.
A private institution of higher education.
Yes.
Don't you see that kind of self-selecting of those who can afford transportation, those can? Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, but that's a policy question, not necessarily one for her to answer.
Well, I'm just asking her opinion.
Okay, I understand. But just so you understand, that decision was...
But I thought we are talking policy here, are we not?
No, we're trying to answer questions and learn more, but we're not having the discussion yet in terms of the policy. That would be in the discussion phrase.
Well, Madam Chair, with all due respect, I've asked her what other she's come up here as an expert for the nation. She knows about how others are facing it. As far as a policy question, how do they handle transporting the kids into the school once they are accepted? And we have major transportation needs in this state.
Right.
So I'd like to know how we can make sure that any child that is accepted into these charter schools can actually get to the charter school.
And that's a legitimate question, but it wasn't what you just asked. I just want to point
I
out.
clarified what I asked then.
Okay.
So
how can you ensure that every public charter school student has access to transportation?
To get to the school. Yeah. Is that a mandate we should have?
You can have it. I would
Do they have it in other areas?
Typically, it varies across states, but we recommend that if you are going to require a charter school to provide transportation, you need to give them access to those transportation dollars.
The charter school has access to the transportation dollars. I'm asking, are they required to provide the transportation for the student? They can access a lot of money, but doesn't mean they spend it for that purpose.
You can require, yes, you have the right in drafting the law to require charter schools to provide transportation to their students. But we would say that is a bad policy decision if you are not providing access to transportation dollars to facilitate that.
So more money for it. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you again. Do each of these charter schools, do they not set up their own policies, their own transportation, everything within the dollars that they have within each school so that they can set up all these policies for transportation for whatever they need for these students?
Yes.
Okay. How do charter schools serve the neediest children? How do they serve the low income and the needy children?
Typically, the flexibility that they have around budget and how they allocate resources, a lot of them put a lot of money into wraparound services. So what the senator was referring to in terms of the whole child's needs. So all those wraparound services that involve social work and the challenges that children in poverty face, they can use creative ways to allocate their budget.
Do they have access to reduced lunches, anything like that?
I'm sorry, say that one more time?
To reduce lunches?
Yes, they do. Federal money would flow to the charter school just like it does to a district
Does that
school.
come to them, or do they allocate from the local board or the state board?
This particular administration, the U.S. Department of Education, has made it much easier for charter schools to receive that money directly as opposed to going through the district.
Do charter schools save money for the state?
I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer to that. I've never looked at state budgets relative to charter school expenses. I would imagine, and this is just a cursory assessment, I would imagine that if you're spending less money, only 90% of the per pupil, that there is some cost savings associated.
Well, just from their allocation alone, they have less money to work with, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Per student, so
yes.
That would, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just, considering the questions from my friend from the 16th, it seems like he's intimating that if every parent doesn't push their kid into a charter school, no child should be able to go unless they all can go. You know, it's a sad world we live in. Some parents don't care if their kids do go to charter schools or wherever. I understand that. There's a lot that has to do with that, much of it the drug crisis. But just because of that, are we just going to simply say no kids can go, to be fair? And just because we can't pick up kids in the rural areas, are we going to say no kids can go to charter schools if we can't bring them all? So is that a fair point?
I think so, yes.
Okay, second question. What's the effect of charter schools in a public school district? What happens when charter schools, which are public schools,
right,
are set up and chartered?
Typically, and there's not been a ton of research out there on the impact in terms of performance, but the two studies that are out there that use sound statistical analysis show that actually achievement is raised in the traditional district school.
So in all the schools, not just the charter school, but
yes,
all the public.
Yes.
So competition works.
I didn't perform the study, so I'm not going to
state okay, that, that's fair enough. Okay, all right, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. It has been almost an hour since you've been up here. We have a few more questions, but I'm hoping that we can just get a couple more done.
Sure.
Okay, sure. Thank you. The Senator from Harrison.
I think she prefaced that because I've got a couple follow-up questions, but that's okay. I'm just teasing you. You're right. Oh, she's been up here a while. I'd like to go home here eventually too. So we're here because you're here.
Well,
I just want you to know I live 3 hours, 2.5 hours away. I'm looking forward to getting on the road. Just a couple follow-up questions. You know, this back and forth between about, you know, underprivileged kids or lower income kids not getting into charter schools, that can be taken care of by doing an opt-out lottery, and where, you know, all the kids would have an opportunity to be picked to go to the charter school, wouldn't it? That would fix that deal immediately.
I haven't thought of that, but
see, I'm thinking of it.
I see you. You're getting creative.
The other thing I always thought about charter schools, though, because most of them are opt-in. I've looked around the country, and I mean, other than the states that allow the Board of Education to convert regular public schools to charter schools, they're mostly opt-in. Doesn't that skew the results? I mean, you know, we have 2 schools in Harrison County. I won't name them. One's the top one in the state. 5 miles away, you got one that's probably at the bottom of the state as far as ranking goes. The one that's at the top, 73% of the kids have 2 parents. Believe me, they're all going to sign up for the charter school. The one that's in the middle or bottom, 3 miles away, has 64% of its kids that have 1 parent or less. Now, if it's an opt-in and it requires a diligent parent to get you into the charter school and you go, you're going to be one of those kids that are going to do well anywhere because you got parents who are backing up your education. Has any study pulled that out, pulled that fact out, what type of kids are actually populating the charter schools?
Well, I just taking a step back, I think if a family is satisfied and happy with the school that they're in, they're not going to opt to leave it. I mean, that's just...
Well, you understand, though, we got a lot of families whose parents could care less if they go to school. We got a lot of families who don't have parents. We've got a lot of families whose parents are drug addicts. I mean, that's our state. That's a lot of other states, too, not just our state. That's
Right.
a lot of other states. They don't care whether their kids go to school or not.
Well,
They homeschool. There's a large percentage, and I'm not in any way denigrating homeschooling, but a lot of people take advantage of our homeschool laws because their kids are delinquent and they're about to get charged with something, and they try to put them into homeschooling. I mean, that's how bad things are. So, I mean, don't you think, if there's no study, if it's not been studied, I understand that, but logically that makes sense, doesn't it? If good kids I shouldn't say good kids, if kids that have strong parental guidance, particularly when it comes to education, listen, I'd have been a criminal without my mom.
God bless moms.
Yeah, you're not kidding, but... I just have no doubt that has a big effect on the great results we get out of charter schools. Because you got good parents sending good kids to charter schools, and they're going to make sure those kids do well.
So
I know you can't answer that. Listen, you don't have to. I'm not going to make you. One more question. We have a lot of border counties. Our state's a big state, lightly populated, a lot of border counties. Some of our biggest cities are along border counties. If we have charter schools, kids would be able to come across the borders and go to those charter schools, wouldn't they? Can you prevent that?
So the enrollment limitation you have is any citizen of you have to live in the state of West Virginia.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with, in Alabama, if you live within 50 miles of the Alabama border, you can.
From another state?
Not in charter, that's for traditional district school legislation. Our charter school legislation does not follow that same.
What is it in this charter school legislation?
I don't believe there is any language around.
I didn't think so either. That's why I thought they could go, because it said it was open enrollment, so I presumed.
But the enrollment limitation is you have to live in the state of West Virginia. It doesn't make a provision.
That answers my question. And thank you for spending so much time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. The senator from Greenbrier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the senator from Wood yield for a question?
Yes.
My buddy. I just want to make sure I heard something you said before correctly. Would you agree with me that every student in the state of West Virginia has the right to an education?
I don't think I said otherwise.
Okay, so you would agree every student within the state of West Virginia has the right to an education?
Well, I mean, did I intimate otherwise? I don't know where you're coming from.
I heard otherwise, but I just wanted to make sure, give you the opportunity.
Right, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, the senior senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've listened to a little bit of this questioning here, and I'm a little bit confused now, and I'm really not. But charter schools, where they were just speaking of, the senator here from Harrison, sorry about that, was talking about for lack of a better term on my part, the have-nots. In the same way for the senior senator from the 16th. But charter schools can actually be set up for that specific purpose. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm a little bit lost on this line of questioning where it's for the elite, where the counties itself or whoever was wanting to establish a charter school, this is a tool that they could actually use to do that. That is correct.
Yes.
Do you want to elaborate?
So charter schools actually serve more students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. I don't know the statistics on how many they're enrolled in two-parent households or not. But there is a lot of research out there that accounts for this creaming argument, where you look at the performance of students who wanted to go to a public charter school, whose parents took the initiative to put them in the lottery to go, and those students that made it into the charter school versus those students that did not make it via the lottery and compared the experience. So you're controlling for that parent initiative that you identified, and you're looking at the performance of those two groups of students and comparing them in the traditional district school and the charter school. And pretty consistently, the students in the charter school perform better. And that's to really isolate the impact of the charter school and control for that parent initiative.
Okay, and then another question on this. The senator from Harrison mentioned a school that was really excelling and 5 miles away they're not. The one that is not excelling could actually petition through the school board, however it may be, for that one to become a charter school, and they'd be unshackled, so to speak, and given greater flexibility out of the norm of what's there to allow that school to be able to perform up to higher expectations, even though they're at a disadvantage for a socioeconomic, whatever it may be.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Now I've got clarity on it.
I want him, so
Thank you, Senior Senator from the 15th. Okay, we really appreciate your testimony and really appreciate you being here. I know that you have a flight that you have to catch. I'm sorry, 1 second. Senior Senator from the 5th, did you have a quick question?
Just a quick one. I think the indication that you said was 55% of free and reduced lunch, and it's 52 in. So you're aware of what's in West Virginia in terms of our free and reduced lunch?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think it's about 70.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank y'all very much.
No problem. So, again, it has been a very long period of time. I'm thinking of giving everybody a 5-minute break so we can recess for, again, those who just need a chance to give rest. Well, just 5 minutes. I think it's only fair. So we're going to recess for just 5 minutes. Okay, the Committee on Education will come to order. Thank you all. So I want to just start off by thanking everybody. I think we're asking good questions and getting a lot of things done, and this is what we wanted to do. But I just want to get a temperature of the committee. Obviously, we're starting to get at a late hour. I am perfectly willing to continue the discussion and the presentation of the bill that our council was in the midst of, and continue getting our questions answered. But if the committee would prefer to, maybe just stop and come back tomorrow morning, I just want to know how the committee members feel. Does anybody have a input? Yes, Senior Senator from
Madam Chair, a while ago you told me that you had one more presentation and you didn't address that to the committee.
That's true.
You should let them know that, so that's factored in with what the committee desires to do.
There is one more presenter that is here today that will not necessarily be here tomorrow, so it would be nice to go ahead and do that ESA portion. But again, just wanted to see how the committee felt about it. Senator from Harrison?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I appreciate, and I have no problem putting in any effort in this body that's required. I guess I do have the question of what's the urgency that we're going to come back here on day 17 on a Saturday when, I don't think this vote is going to be delayed unnecessarily in any way. It just doesn't seem quite to fit in. We've kind of been hearing some pretty, brief presentations over the past week. We could have been debating the bill if we were concerned about that, but is there some urgent need that requires us to come back tomorrow? Because personally, I live 2 hours away. I have an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old. I know you have a whole bunch of kids too. I don't know if you get to see them on the weekends or if they're down here with you. I don't know what your arrangements are, but personally, if there's some urgent need, I'm more than willing to say I'll be here tomorrow, and if you command me to be here, I'll be here, but it seems kind of unnecessary.
I just want to flush out these details, and yes, I do want to get this bill passed. Your opinion, yes, thank you. Senior Senator, Senator from Boone, I'm sorry, was first. Go ahead, Senator from Boone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, the idea is to finish up the explanation of the bill. We're just got past, I guess, the charter school aspect. Then the next step would be the discussion, the amendment, and put the bill upon its passage either tonight or tomorrow. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Senior Senator from the 16th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just got this bill, or at least a version, yesterday. And I just got the other version, I guess the updated version today at 1. Well, maybe it was 1:30 by the time we got it copied. And I'm not sure what the fast track, this is a major piece of legislation. I'd like to take it back to my constituents back in the Eastern Panhandle and talk with some folks because particularly, they're the experts that I answer to. They're the ones that are different sections here. I mean, you got PEIA, you got school levies. I want to talk to the boards of education if they want to do this. I want to talk to, the parents to see about some of these aspects, some of the teachers, about the increase of class sizes. So I would ask that at least you give me the courtesy to be able to take this piece of legislation back to the people that I represent so that they can have an opportunity to have some input on this too, so that when amendment I make or when I'm discussing it, I'm not just doing it from my own basis, that I'm representing the people that elected me. So I would ask that, and also the public have an opportunity to give feedback on it before we just rush it out of here. We don't even do regular bills that are introduced. Very rarely do we rush this way of regular bills that are sometimes a couple pages and rush it through as fast as this major piece of legislation that we're originating today, that you want it passed out tomorrow at the latest. and not give opportunity for me as a representative of constituents from the Eastern Panhandle to go back and ask the folks that sent me down here. I just don't think that's right. It's definitely a affront to the democratic process, and I would ask that you reconsider and allow us that opportunity to go back and talk to our constituents so that we can come down better informed on Monday to be able to put forward their voices on this.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate your opinion, and I definitely am trying to get us to have time to analyze, to discuss, to debate, to amend, but I will tell you that it is the intention of this chair to get this bill through, and then afterwards it's going to probably go to finance, and there will be opportunity for input. So, yes.
With all due respect, finance looks at the money. Okay, primarily, I mean, we talk policy too, because the finance chair is very open and about that, but primarily we look at the money. The education committee looks at policy. And rushing it through here, most of what people will really want to know is the policy aspect of it. So I still don't, I guess what I'm trying to understand is the rush. What is the urgency that we can't allow for the people of West Virginia, and particularly our constituency, to have an opportunity to look at it, to give feedback to us as their representative so that we can represent their views and their input in this process. I'm just wanting to know from you, what is the urgency that we need to get this passed tomorrow or this week, this Sunday? Why not have it so that people can look at it and come back on Monday and continue working on it? And maybe get some folks in here to do testimony that they weren't necessarily invited by you to come to also have input on this. Because they don't have access, or at least they didn't have the access to the version that we're now working off of unless it's on the web now, until 1 o'clock today. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, Madam Chair, what's the urgency of this?
All I can tell you is that what my intention is, and obviously the opinion is taken into consideration, but that is not going to necessarily be the way that we're going to do it. So, okay. Senator from Harrison, recognized for a question.
Yeah, first of all, I agree 100% with my fellow senator, and he articulated it much better than I did, but I think we should get the question answered why we're in such a hurry to vote on this bill. But I also wanted to ask, I heard an adjective in there that kind of concerned me. I thought when I asked you earlier, this bill was going to finance, and then you said probably going to finance. Is it going to finance?
We have to make that move. As you know, we have to make the motion to recommend it to go to.
Well, I would make that motion.
Well, I'm just saying we haven't voted on that yet. That's
well, I understand.
Well,
I'm going to make that motion that we reference this to finance. If anybody's going, I'd like to have that resolved because I don't want to leave here and find out or vote on it because you want to vote on it and then find out it's not going to finance. So I make that motion.
Okay. Not exactly sure. So the senator from Harrison made the motion to recommend that this bill be
to double reference it to
double
finance,
reference to finance. Senior Senator from the 15th.
I rise in opposition to the senator's motion at this point in time. We're not even far enough along into the bill that we're considering amendments or anything else. He can make that motion, but I am opposed to this motion. Let's get ready, get back on track, get the presentation taking place here, and move along with the process of getting everybody educated what's in this bill. Okay, we'll deal with amendments and motions at a later point in time, but at this point in time, I reject and oppose the senator's motion.
I'd like to ask Senator.
No.
No?
Okay.
Let's vote.
Okay, so there's been an objection, so we will vote on the motion as to whether or not to recommend this to second reference to finance. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay.
No.
Okay. Call for division has been. Okay. A roll call has been requested. Has it sustained? Okay. So will the clerk please call out?
Senator Azinger?
I'm sorry. We're voting on the
motion.
The motion.
Yeah, no.
Senator Baldwin?
Yes.
Senator Beach?
Yes.
Senator Blair?
No.
Senator Foley? Senator Klein?
No.
Senator Maynard?
No.
Senator Plymall?
Yes.
Okay. So there was 7 nays, 6 yeas, the motion fails. Okay, so Hank, if you don't mind coming up here and continuing with the presentation.
The next area that's in the bill is compulsory school attendance. The bill changes a provision of the statute governing school attendance and what must occur in the case of 3 to 5 unexcused absences. The modification requires that the attendance director or assistant or principal shall make meaningful contact with the parent, guardian, or custodian of the student to ascertain the reasons for the unexcused absences, what measures the school may employ to assist the student in attending. Okay, that's okay. The next section relates to public school support. The bill adds language to the definition of professional student support personnel to include personnel who provide direct social and emotional support services to students, including social workers and psychologists. And this goes along with the section a little bit later that increases the next section basically, that increases the foundation allowance to the county for professional student support personnel in the amount of money that's required to pay the state minimum salary subject to certain criteria. In making the computation, each county shall receive an allowance for 4 7/100 state aid eligible professional student support personnel positions to each 1,000 in net enrollment. The bill also amends the percentage of each county's allowance for current expense from 70.25% to 71.25% of the county's state average cost per square footage per student for operations and maintenance. A proviso is added to the statute governing county basic foundation and total basic foundation allowance. The proviso states that for all years after 2018, in calculating the allocated state aid share of the county's basic foundation program, when subtracting the amount of the county's local share, if the county's local share is greater than it was for the fiscal year 15-16, and then the allocated state aid share of the county's basic foundation allowance shall be the difference between the cost of its basic foundation program and the county's 2015-2016 local share, or in other words, just basically putting a cap on local share at the 2015-16 levels. The next area is education of exceptional children. It amends the powers and duties of the state superintendent as to exceptional children and adds language that a separate appropriation shall be made to the Department of Education to be dispersed to the county boards and public charter schools to assist them with serving exceptional children with high cost, high acuity, special needs that exceed the capacity of the county. It allows public charter schools to apply for and receive funding as any county board for exceptional students. The modification also removes language referencing the receipt of a county plan for integrated classrooms. The next section relates to education savings accounts. The bill creates, and there's one thing that is wrong in the abstract. I'll just have to point that out as we're going. The bill creates the Education Savings Account Act, or the ESA Act. An ESA is an education savings account to which funds are allocated by the treasurer to the parent or parents of an ESA student in order to pay qualifying educational expenses to educate the student. The new language defines the basic elements of the ESA program, including the amount of funds deposited into an account, and this is the part that is wrong.
It says shall be in an amount equivalent to 75% of the prior year statewide. It's basically an accord limited to the amount that is appropriated in the current language. And it requires that these funds are derived from a line item appropriation. ESA program funds are to be used for tuition and or fees at a private school, tuition and or fees for non-public online learning programs, tutoring services provided by an individual or tutoring facility, services contracted for and provided by a public district, charter, or magnet school, textbooks, curriculum, or other instructional materials, computer hardware or other technological devices used to meet the student's educational needs, educational software and applications, school uniforms, fees for nationally standardized tests and advanced placement examinations, fees for summer education programs and specialized after-school education programs, tuition fees, instructional materials, and examination fees at a career or technical school provider, educational services and therapies, tuition and fees at an institution of higher education, fees for transportation to and from an education service provider, and any other educational expenses that are approved by the treasurer. The bill provides for an application for an ESA and sets out the responsibilities of the treasurer. It also provides for a parent review committee and sets forth requirements for the rights of education service providers. The ESA Act also includes language governing legal proceedings and provides that no liability arises on the part of the treasurer or the state or any county school district on the award or use of an ESA. The next section is salary increases for teachers and school service personnel. The bill increases.
I'm sorry, Hank. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I'm actually surprised that there aren't any questions, but we did have a presenter, and I do want to give her an opportunity to speak.
Sure.
So if you don't mind,
Don't
we will let her come up to speak. So.
Sorry, I'm a little tall.
It's okay. Could you identify yourself, please? And then we have to swear you in.
My name is Rochelle Ingen, and I am with the Institute for Justice.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Rucker and members of the committee, for hearing me today. My name is Rochelle Ingen, and I work at the Institute for Justice, otherwise known as IJ. IJ's conviction that Americans have the right to control their own destinies drives our efforts to ensure that all parents, regardless of means, enjoy the freedom to choose where and how their children are educated. We help legislators and policymakers draft programs that are constitutionally defensible, and then we defend those programs if and or when they are challenged in court. To date, we have represented parents and families to defend private school choice programs across the country in over 30 federal and state courts. We have also successfully defended 2 programs at the United States Supreme Court. There are currently 26 states, along with the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, that have a private school choice program. West Virginia is not one of them. According to polling I have seen, 80% of people in West Virginia are dissatisfied with West Virginia's public schools, and only 2% rate them as excellent. The legislation before you creates an ESA program. ESA programs allow parents to use funds deposited into their students' account, not just for private school tuition, but also for a wide variety of educational goods and services, including but not necessarily limited to tutoring, purchasing curricula for use at home, online instruction, special education and related services, and even saving for college tuition. More flexible than publicly funded or tax credit scholarship programs, ESAs allow unprecedented opportunities for parents to customize their children's education and take advantage of the rapid growth in educational technologies and resources. Before I open it up to questions, I would like to explain a little bit of the research about private school choice programs. Not only is the overwhelming preponderance of existing empirical evidence demonstrates that educational choice programs improve academic programs for those who participate in them. There is also abundant evidence that competition works and private school choice programs encourage traditional public schools to improve. Lastly, no empirical study has ever found an educational choice program to cause a negative fiscal impact on either taxpayers or public schools. With that, I will open it up for questions, but like I said, the Institute for Justice is a law firm, but I want to clarify I am not a lawyer. So any any constitutional questions should be directed to General Counsel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any lights up, so if you don't mind, I will just go ahead and ask you a few questions myself.
Absolutely.
So you said that there is empirical evidence that it does not hurt. What was that you said?
Yeah, absolutely. No empirical study has ever found an educational choice program to cause a negative fiscal impact on public schools.
Okay, and so what that means in layman's terms is that states that have adopted some school choice, they have not seen a decline or that the schools have suffered, the public schools have suffered because of it?
Right. Those public schools have not suffered financially. There's also evidence that private school choice programs have forced public schools to improve.
Okay. And again, what is the interest of the Institute for Justice in this topic, if you don't mind telling me?
Definitely. So the Institute for Justice has 4 pillars that we work in. One of those is educational choice. We believe that parents know best, know the best for their children and should have the option to pursue an education that is best for their child. It is the government's responsibility to pay for public schools, education for K through 12, but it is not necessarily their responsibility to provide those schools.
Okay, so as you stated, so parents can make the best decisions for their child, but the parents who don't have enough money, what real choice do they have?
Right. School choice already exists for those who can afford it. Individuals can move to a district that has really good public schools. They can send their child to private school. A parent can stay home and homeschool their child. What an ESA program does is it gives the parents that can't pursue those options the opportunity to send their child to a school or build an education other than a public school. Public schools can be great for children, but they also don't work for some children. And what the ESA does is it gives parents the ability to truly craft an education that fits the needs of their child.
In the states that have adopted ESA programs, how much of the population takes advantage of it, or what are the models in terms of involvement?
Definitely. So right now, 6 states have ESA programs. Nevada does have a program, but it is not currently funded, so it is not operating at this time. Florida has the largest participation in that 3% of eligible students, not all students, just eligible students, use the ESA. In the other states, Arizona, Tennessee, Mississippi, and North Carolina, it is less than 1%.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation, but we do have some lights lit up now. So,
okay.
Senior Senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the ESAs, the savings account, what type of things can they purchase with these savings accounts?
Definitely. So it's actually outlined in the bill what they can spend the funds on. I'm looking at page 88, beginning on line 12. And under the ESA in West Virginia, if this bill were to be passed, parents could spend the funds on tuition and or fees at a private school, tuition and or fees for non-public online learning programs, tutoring services, services contracted for or provided by a public district, charter, or magnet school. So say, for example, a parent wanted their child to take math at the district public school, then the parent could purchase that class from the district public school. Textbooks, curriculum, or other instructional materials, computer, hardware, or other technological devices, educational software and applications, school uniforms, fees for nationally standardized assessments, fees for summer education programs, tuition fees, instructional materials, and examination fees at a career or technical school, educational services and therapies, tuition and fees at an institution of higher education, fees for transportation, and then any other educational expenses that the treasurer would approve.
Okay. That leads me to my next question. Children with special needs, Because can it help with that as well? And how does the ESAs help with children with special needs?
Definitely. So the majority of ESA programs in other states are designed just for students with special needs. Students with special needs and any students can use their ESA funds to purchase therapy or anything else that would really cater to that special needs child.
Okay. I may come back for another question.
Okay.
I want to digest that one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Harrison?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Rochelle.
Rochelle, what's your last name?
Ingen.
Ingen. Ms. Ingen, thank you for coming here today. I just had a couple questions. Have you looked at our bill that's before us?
I have.
And so there's an ESA provision in it to allow these accounts to be set up?
Yes.
Tell me how that works. How does the money get into the accounts?
So in the case of this bill, 75% of the state funding for a student will go into an account. How that account is created is up to the treasurer, and how the parent receives that money is up to the treasurer.
So that hasn't been decided yet?
Right, and that is at the discretion of the treasurer.
And where does that money come from?
It's the state-based funding for a child, just the state-based funding.
It comes out of the public school where that child's located, correct?
Well, the money will follow the child.
Exactly. So, again, this is kind of like the charter school question. The county where that child resides and the school that child would go to, that money is going to come out of that budget because it's going to follow the child with the ESA.
Correct, but that's no different than if the child were to leave on their own without an ESA.
Agree 100%. But a reduced budget is a negative impact on a school, isn't it?
I don't think I'm at the authorization to answer that question.
Well, you just said there was no negative impacts. Would not reducing a school's budget have a negative impact? I mean, just common sense. I'm not asking you to say whether it's a big impact, little impact, but that's a negative impact. Taking money away from any school would be a negative impact.
I don't think it's negative impact because the money is following a child, and a school should not be paid to educate a child that they're simply not educating.
Okay, so you just don't think that that's punishment, or that you don't think it's a bad thing to take the money out because the child's not there, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? I don't think that I
I said you don't think it's a bad thing because the child's not there, and you don't think the school should get the money, correct?
No, I do not believe a school that does not educate a child should receive funds for educating that child.
Thank you.
Or for not educating that child, excuse me.
Okay, I got you. Thank you. But and certainly if a child goes to a private or parochial school, that's that child's choice, right? The parents of that child, presumably.
Absolutely. If that's how they choose to spend their ESA funds just on private school tuition, then that is that parent's
Yeah, I really
choice.
wasn't talking about ESA funds, but I'm just saying that's the parent's choice. It's a free choice to send your child to a parochial or a private school.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. This senior senator from the 6th.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. To address some of the questions of the senator from Harrison, and thank you, Rochelle, for being here. So is approximately half of the dollar figure floating over the student's head federal funding, or almost half, or how much?
I'm not sure of the breakdown of funding that children in West Virginia receive. I think that would be a better question for General Counsel.
Okay, that's what I've heard, or pretty, let's say approximately half. I've done some research on this, and I've found that the federal funding is based on the population of the state, at least from my resources. So the school will continue to receive this federal funding because it's not based on enrollment.
Definitely. And that's the case for local dollars as well, unless in the state of West Virginia, local dollars are funded on a per pupil basis.
That's true, and there is local funding involved there. But as far as the federal dollars go, that money will still come to the school board.